Historic Madison's Oral History Project. I, Lorraine Archer, am talking with the Mrs. Elizabeth and Mildred Morgan at their home in Madison, Wisconsin. This is November 18, 1985. And I think we'll start by asking Mildred if she would tell us something about Mildred and Betty's parents, where they came from, and approximately when, if she knows.
Well, our mother's parents came from the Belfast area of Ireland, before the Civil War. And they came to Madison and settled on West Dayton Street, the 1200 block. And they lived and died there, in that area. And
Your father?
our father came from between Madison and Oregon in the country.
Okay. Well, now, where did you grow up then?
In Madison on West Washington Avenue.
That's the Fourth Ward.
That is the Fourth Ward, right.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure you know all the boundaries of the Fourth Ward, but the part that you are particularly concerned with, would you tell us where that is?
Yes, the part that we are particularly concerned with is one side of West Washington Avenue and Lake Monona. Those would be what would they be?
Boundaries.
The boundaries.
North and south,
Yeah.
right.
And I don't know I think it's Monona Avenue was the other boundary. I think it was.
Mhm.
Bedford.
Huh?
Bedford.
Oh, I think it went farther than Bedford, maybe not. I really don't know the other
Mhm.
boundary. I don't know it. But I think Monona Avenue was the most eastern boundary.
Where was your house? Do you remember the street number?
Yes, we lived and were raised at 423 West Washington. And the house is now down. It was right next to the Nania Clinic, dental offices and clinic. Collins and Dr. Nania, the two of them. And they bought our property and rented the house for probably 10 years anyway, maybe more than that, and then tore it down for parking.
Do you have any idea when that was? Do you remember about how long ago?
Oh, they tore it down probably 10 years ago. What would that be? This is...
Probably 75 or approximately then.
Approximately, right.
Right. Well, let's talk about this Fourth Ward. It's very famous, and we read about it a lot. Can you think of who some of the people were who were your neighbors?
Yes.
And their nationalities? You mentioned Irish in your family.
And most of these others were Irish, too.
Okay.
We were in a very Irish neighborhood with Casserleys, Mullins, Dorseys. Wayman's weren't Irish. McCarthy's. Mrs. Nielsen was Irish.
Uh-huh.
I guess that's all we
And
mentioned.
then, who were some of the other people who lived in the area?
On West Wilson Street was Albert Schmiedemann. He was a haberdasher, and he became mayor of Madison. Then he became governor of Wisconsin, and then ambassador to Norway.
Goodness.
And then Senator Spooner lived on West Wilson Street, about in the 300 block. That's all I know about him.
Mm-hmm.
Leo Crowley is really quite well known. He lived on West Wilson and on Broome Street, right.
How would you tell what he is?
And he was chairman of the Milwaukee Railway and advisor to Preston Grossville. The Proudfits lived on the corner of West Washington and Fairchild. They had a perfectly magnificent home. It was about half the block.
Mm.
And that's now the Lorraine Hotel. And Governor Fairchild's home was on the corner of West Wilson and Monona, where the state office building is now. It was a perfectly beautiful red brick home in a magnificent yard going right down to the lake. Terraced. It was just beautiful. Thornton Wilder also lived on West Wilson Street for a while. I think it was the 400 block. Oh, the Kessley brothers. They lived on the corner of West Washington and Broome. They both played the piano divinely. Eugene became the accompanist for Blossom Seeley on the Orpheum circuit. And Eugene became associated with the Yellow Cab Company in Milwaukee, but he still played the piano. And I imagine they are both gone by this time, but I don't know. And as children, we used to go and sit on the curb and listen to them play. Oh, their music was divine. They played both by ear and by note, mostly by ear. And Judge C. Becker and the La Follettes lived on Broome Street across from Doty School. And they were related. I think they were cousins, but I'm not sure. Then there's the Tormeys. The family, the parents of Dr. Albert and Dr. Tom Tormey lived in the 300 block of West Washington, where the Methodist Hospital now stands. And then they got married, and Dr. Tom, I think he lived on...
He lived down where the parish house is now, for the Lutheran Church.
Yeah, but he lived on West Washington before that. When he was first married, Dr. Tom lived, he lived on West Washington. I think it was the end of the 300 block, right. And then who was his brother?
Albert.
Al Tormey lived there until he was married, and then he moved out to Sherman Avenue. And the girls, Marion died on West Washington. She was the youngest, and she died there. Loretta lived there until she was married. Frances lived there. Julia lived there and taught at Central High School.
I remember her.
And I think I've included them all.
I think you named, what, 4 girls?
Mhm.
I think I heard 4.
That's all I can think of at the present moment, anyway.
Well, there were German people, too, weren't there?
Yes, there were. 2 houses down from us were the Bleeds. And,
Is that the printer?
yes. Mr. Frank Bleed, who started the printing firm, lived there. And he had 3 or 4 sons, and they all lived there, too, before they were married. And he had 2 daughters, Edna, who married Bill Walker. He was a radio man here in Madison. And Josephine, who became Mrs. Spith from the Spith Clothing Company.
Goodness, there are a lot of Madison names here that have affected our history, and Wisconsin's history, too, and
Right.
national history.
Right.
And all growing up in the same area.
It was a small community.
Yes. If you think of any more as we go along, just put them in.
Okay.
All right. What you mentioned, Doty School. Did you go to Doty?
I went to Doty. Indeed I did. And when I got into 2nd grade, Doty School became so crowded that those of us who lived on our side of West Washington Avenue had to go to Washington School. So I went to Washington School for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grades. In 5th grade, Washington School became so crowded that those of us on our side of Washington Avenue had to go back to Doty School. So I graduated from Doty School.
Washington School is no longer in existence, and I think people might like to know where that was.
It was on the corner of Broome and Johnson Street. And then they built a new school down on the corner of West Dayton and Bedford, and it became the Board of Education building. Washington School no longer exists.
Right. What about the churches in the area?
Well, it was a very religious neighborhood. St. Raphael's Cathedral was on the corner of Main, Henry, and Fairchild Street.
Where it is now.
Where it is now, right. And most of the people in the Fourth Ward, I think, attended St. Raphael's. The people of German ancestry went to Holy Redeemer, which is still located over on West Johnson Street. And then there were a few others. The Congregational Church, as I remember it, was originally on the corner of Fairchild and West Washington. A beautiful old building, just beautiful. And Grace Church was on the corner of West Washington and the Square, Carroll Street, and still is.
Now, that's where you went to church.
That's where we went to church.
Right.
That's where our grandparents, when they came to this country, affiliated with Grace Church, and our own parents and us. We are the third generation, but we have cousins that are the fifth generation.
My word.
That's Betty Kurtenacker's family.
I see.
Betty is the fourth generation, and her children are the fifth.
Are the fifth. Now that's the Gays then.
That's the Gays. Betty
Mhm.
Kurtenacker. Betty Gay
Betty
Kurtenacker.
Gay Kurtenacker.
Her mother was our cousin.
Oh, I didn't know
So
that.
Betty is
Ruby.
our-
Gay.
Ruby.
Ruby. Mhm.
And Betty is
I
our
didn't
cousin
know.
once removed.
I never knew. I knew you knew her, of course, but I didn't know you were related. Well, wasn't there a convent someplace in that area
yes,
too?
the convent, St. Regina's Convent, was on the corner of Henry and West Washington, across from St. Raphael's School. And they had always had a very good music department. And that's where I took piano lessons.
Mildred, in addition to the schools and the churches and the convent, can you think of any other buildings that are of interest to people that played an important part when you were living on West Washington Avenue?
Yes, there was the Milwaukee Road Depot, which really is in the 8th Ward. But it played a very important part in the life of that area in the city. There was a lot of railroad activity there, and the passenger trains were very numerous, as well as the freight trains. And they brought a lot of people into Madison and took a lot of people away from Madison.
Betty and Mildred both, chime in, both of you now. Think of other recollections of growing up in that area. Can you think from your childhood what comes to your mind first?
Well, for me it would be the Gypsies. Sometimes the trains of Gypsies would be 20 wagons, horse-drawn wagons, with families in each one. And they camped, as I remember it, out near Olin Park on Lake Monona. And when they would come to town, all of the merchants would alert their clerks and anybody else that was handy to watch to see that the Gypsies didn't pick too much up and put it in their big sleeves. The Indians who were here before we were, of course, camped on Lake Monona too, but they camped on the east end, as I remember it, and they had planted 2 rows of pine trees around the south end of the lake that were that were the guideposts for them to move around from one campgrounds to another.
Which tribe of Indians?
Winnebagos.
I see. You didn't see any, though, as a child,
No.
but did your parents ever
Yes.
mention them?
Our grandmother, whom I never knew, told her children, and I presume they also lived through this, that when the Indians came, she'd take her children and go outside, and Indian John, I think she called him, would come in, and if there was any fresh bread or anything like that, they'd help themselves to it.
Hmm.
But that was before my time.
Which childhood games did you play?
Oh, well, I was privileged in having in our backyard things that they thought would keep me home, since I loved to run away.
Oh,
And so I had a teeter-totter and a sandbox and a swing, and I guess that was all that was in the backyard. But when we played, when the neighborhood children played together, we played hide and seek and Run My Good Sheep Run, and jacks and roller skating. I never rode a bicycle, though Mildred rode one. I lived with roller skates on, and even ate my meals with them on. Pom-pom pull away was also a game that we enjoyed. And when it was winter, we spent our full time sliding and down the hill on West Washington, which we iced. And also, as far as I was concerned, I loved to ride the sleds on the drays that were hauling things around Madison. Sure.
Way back, Betty, I think it was you, mentioned drays and sleds. And lest future Madisonians forget about that kind of thing or don't read about it, I think it'd be interesting to know what was on those sleds, what sorts of wagons, or what was their function.
Well, the grocery delivery boys had lighter wagons, and one horse as a rule to pull it, and they were young boys, of course older than we were, who were riding these sleds. But anyway, when we'd get on, they'd whip the horse up, and away we'd go, and faster than we could manage to get off. So we rode around a lot. Then there were the horses, the work horses that pulled the beer wagons and the coal wagons.
Nice.
Well, not older. And they were slower, so that they were fun to ride, and they always had older men, naturally, driving them, and they were more considerate of us when we'd get on. They didn't whip them up. Well, they couldn't have gone much faster than they were anyway. But that was the way I even tried to get to school that way, so I wouldn't have to walk.
3 blocks.
3 blocks. You mentioned ice delivery. Now, of course, that was in the summertime, but with our modern refrigeration, I think some people don't even know about ice boxes and where the ice came from and how it was delivered. I remember that from my childhood, chipping it off.
Yes. Well, they when the lakes froze, Conklins, who were the chief dealers in ice and coal in Madison, would have their men go out and cut the ice off the lakes. And then they'd store it in huge warehouses, so to speak, where it would last for most of the summer. Then it was delivered to your house in the summer every day. and you'd put a sign up in your window for 25 pounds or 50 pounds or whatever you wanted of the ice, and they'd bring it and put it right in your ice box for you.
I distinctly remember that. And then if we had a cold drink, my mother'd get an ice
Yeah.
pick and
Yes.
chip the ice off and
That's right.
put it in. Did your mother ever make root beer? My mother tried a few times, disastrously, with caps blowing around the base. We used to good root beer. We used to laugh about that. That
I'll
it would
bet.
build up and explode. Well, we keep mentioning the lakes whenever we talk about Madison. What about swimming? Did you go in Monona or Mendota?
We never were married very much on swimming.
Not so much.
I was not.
Not Mildred.
No.
Oh, what about you, Betty?
Well, I love to swim, and the young woman across the street from us who my mother and the other mothers would trust would take us as little kids over to Lake Mendota, and she taught us how to swim and how to be careful in the water. But swimming was one of the things I loved.
How about old circuses, carnivals, or Dane County Fair, or whatever?
They were all here, and we went to every one that we could.
Good.
We helped the circus unload, perform, and load. It was a day that started at 4:30 in the morning and ended about 11 o'clock at night when the last horse was loaded or whatever it was that was last, because we all loved the circus. And the carnivals were, well, there were lots of carnivals, and we went to those as often as we could, but not every one of them. And the fair was, of course, something that we went to look at the stock, and to get some of Ascher's famous candy that, well, the Ascher family is no longer in there. I don't believe any Aschers left in Madison. But when the county fair was a very popular thing in our lives, that candy that the Aschers made was just delicious. It was some kind of a pulley. They
Taffy,
pulled taffy, like.
That makes me think of the old Keeley chocolate company whenever I think of good old Madison candy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was elegant. I guess it's still being right in the old chocolate shop. And now we'll get on a whole other topic there.
That's not the fourth ward.
That's not the fourth ward, but it's still all right.
Yeah.
All right. It occurs to me that when we were talking about your family, I didn't even ask you your father's and mother's names. And would you mind, we're a little late in the reel, but let's put that in, because I know you so well, but after all, this is for history.
Yeah. Well, his name was George Henry Morgan. And by training, he was a butcher. But he could not continue being a butcher because of an allergy. So he became a fireman and ended his days as the first city fire inspector.
Where were the fire stations or the central fire?
The central fire
building.
station where he was on
Webster Street.
Webster Street.
And horse-drawn?
Yes.
And horse-drawn?
Yes. He
fire
lived to
trucks.
see the advent of the motorized fire department. But most of his time in the department was spent with the horses.
What was your mother's name?
Alice Armstrong.
All right, now we have that in. I'm glad we didn't forget that. This has been exceedingly interesting for me and has brought back many memories. It just occurred to me, Mildred and Betty, that we didn't talk about transportation, except we've alluded to wagons and the fire truck, horse-drawn. And I imagine that having lived on West Washington Avenue, you could just walk to the square. But what was the public transportation when you were growing up?
When we were growing up, the public transportation was the streetcar system. And the streetcar ran on West Main Street back of us, but we never used it because we were within 3 blocks of the square or within walking distance of anything that we were interested in, so we never used the streetcar unless we went to the cemetery.
The Forest Hill or
Forest Hill, right.
out off
Right.
Regent Street. Didn't the streetcar go up State Street?
Yes, and around the square. And I don't know, I guess it went down King Street, I believe.
Probably down to the Northwestern
Yes,
depot, I
think that's the
suppose.
way it went.
Well, I remember when buses first started, and the Gays, Randall Gays, started a bus, I think with one of the Williams, Tom
Probably.
Williams family, because we lived on West Madison, and then they would hook up with a streetcar. Yes, they'd pick us up on Commonwealth and Monroe, and then either, let's see now, we'd sometimes go to Wingra Park, and the streetcar stopped in what we call Wingra Park, Grant Street and Monroe, that area, the old Grimm pharmacy area.
Yes.
Then we could go downtown. Or somehow or other, we'd get over to Regent Street and then take the streetcar on Regent Street and cross the railroad tracks on the Viaduct and get over to Monroe Street. This streetcar business. That was exciting, though.
Sure.
All right. Well, I thank you very much. This has been interesting and fun for me. And if you think of anything else, we can always add it.